So is immorality inevitable? And there are people who talk about sin like, well, you know, since we're all sinners and we sin and we, you know, it's like, it's just normal. God doesn't want us to be presumptuous, but neither does he want us to be paranoid. And there's some scripture here that I think is very powerful. In the specific context of seeking to be sexually pure and resisting sexual temptation, Solomon says this to his son. So this is part that we kind of skipped over, but we want to go back to. My son, preserve sound judgment and discernment. Do not let them out of your sight. They will be life for you, an ornament to grace your neck. So in the context of his warning about all these things, he's saying this. Then you will go on your way in safety, and your foot will not stumble. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. In other words, you don't have to constantly be paranoid about falling into sin if you're making wise decisions, being fully aware of the vulnerability, the temptations that you face are real, and you're setting your eye forward and you're not looking to the left and to the right, and you're not gazing upon others that in a way that could be then relax. Have no fear of sudden disaster or of the ruin that overtakes the wicked. Wow, that's a powerful statement. For the Lord will be your confidence, and he will keep your foot from being snared. Now, this is kind of a refreshing change from all of the warnings like this. And you sort of go, wow, if I'm not really, really extraordinarily careful, my fall it's absolutely inevitable. And in fact, even though I am careful, 95% of the time, or 98% of the time, could I just suddenly fall off the cliff of immorality? In my experience, people don't suddenly fall off the cliff into immorality. They make little compromises that are cumulative in their force, that lead to other compromises and other compromises. And they're not being careful the kinds of TV shows and movies they watch, not being careful of their conversation. They're not being alert to this person that they're hanging out with. And why are you going to lunch with somebody else's wife? If you're married or they're married or both or whatever, why are you doing this? Is that really required? Can't you sit down in a room where other people are on the fringes if you have to do business? And if you're not doing business, and it's just personal pleasure, personal relationship, do you see the danger that's built into this? I mean, be wise. But if you are, then you don't have to live in fear of the sudden disaster that overtakes the wicked, because that sudden disaster or the ruin that overtakes the wicked is actually usually fairly predictable, because that's the direction they're headed, like the book that is being pushed off just 1/4 of an inch at a time or 1/2 an inch at a time, and finally it goes over. So in essence, he's telling his son, if you stop pushing that book, you don't have to sit there worried about whether the book's going to fall. I love this passage because it helps a little bit. I know someone who's on pastoral staff at a church where one of the rules is that wherever they go and wherever they travel, and I'm all for having all kinds of accountability structures and everything else, and like, for instance, I never travel anywhere, stay in the same, if I'm not with my wife Nancy, nobody who works for our ministry, no secretary or assistant is staying in the same hotel I'm staying in. If they're coming at all, they're at another hotel, and if Nancy's not with me, they're not coming at all. I mean, it's just not a comfortable situation. Part of it is not, not simply because you could succumb to temptation, but even if there is no temptation, the very appearance of it and the image that's being projected where you come out of the same hotel and you're being escorted by, well, you were on 2 different floors, and you didn't even see each other last night, but it's still not a good position to be in. But I know of a church where the pastoral staff, one of the things you agree to is that when you're traveling somewhere, unless you're, and these are men, unless you're with your wife, if there's a woman on an elevator, you don't get on an elevator with a woman. Now, if that will truly keep you from immorality, and you're that susceptible, I would say by all means don't get on an elevator with a woman. But I've been on a lot of elevators with a lot of women, and I have never thought or believed, even in retrospect, that I was putting myself or her in danger. Now, if you were talking about sitting at a restaurant next to somebody, or sitting at a bar next to somebody, or even hanging out with somebody who's a coworker or a conference that you're at, or something like that. But just the amount of time that's involved in an elevator and the nature of the elevator, to me, I would say, for me, that would be extreme and unnecessary. But I don't want to discourage anyone else from doing it if that's what it takes. There was a time where I was a pastor, young man, and there was a supermarket in our area called Fred Meyer. Was there a Fred Meyer anywhere around? Okay. So, and there was a main entrance where you came in those days that was way more convenient than the side entrances, and that's where all the best parking was and everything else. I stopped coming in that main entrance because when you came in, it was more narrow than you would have expected to be, and there were magazine racks. And the magazine racks, and now there's very few magazine racks, and they're another part of the store, but a bunch of them were just the kind of stuff, just popular magazines. They were not pornography, but they just had very suggestive photos on them. And though I would come in and I would look away, it started to really bother me. Because every once in a while I would turn and I'd catch sight of something in that image or whatever. So I started coming, and it was my rule, my self-imposed rule, that I didn't use that entrance. I went to the very inconvenient entrance and came in the other way. Okay, that's what I needed. Some years later, after a practice of just disciplining my eyes and making the covenant with my eyes, I realized I don't have to do that anymore because I just won't look. I won't look. And then they moved the magazine rack. Okay. But my point is, know what you're vulnerable to and don't feel silly or stupid. There are guys who feel like wherever they go, they need to take a certain picture of their wife and family and have it, with them or whatever. If that helps you, by all means, do it. But I do think that we don't have to live with the fear if we're making wise decisions and we're checking in, like every day I'll call, text my wife, go back and forth. And it's because I love her, and it's not like, okay, check off the box, now I won't commit immorality because I touched base with my wife, because what if I can't touch base with my wife? What if my wife is in a coma? What if my wife has dementia? If we want to be sure that we're not setting ourselves up to where we're so weak and so undisciplined that if we don't do the following 6 things, then we're liable to fall off. into immorality. But once again, caution, if that's what it takes, do it. Do whatever it takes. That's the radical steps of Jesus. Because me coming in another entrance or somebody staying off an elevator does not compare to gouging your eye out and cutting your hand off. If that's what it takes, that's a very small thing to have to do. So you just figure out what it takes for you. Some things that are temptations to some people are simply not temptations to other people. And sometimes it's remarkable, and sometimes we're rationalizing when we say that. But I think we don't have to live like we're always on the brink of the sudden disaster and catastrophe, as long as we're obeying Scripture, keeping our eyes where they should be, avoiding, fleeing from the temptation, staying away from it, and doing all the things, the steps of wisdom and purity that Solomon encouraged his sons to do.